The second point I mentioned already, and this is the language aspect to it, and because this is very important in the account in Perelandra. It's already been mentioned in the on Malacandra, in Out of the Silent Planet, when Ransom is trying to learn the language of the others, and he's learning that their way of describing things is different than his. We will dichotomize, abstract, and separate the physical from the spiritual, and the cause from the effect, and so forth. And yet, what we take as completely not just distinct. The distinction is okay. The separation is the problem. He wants to reintegrate it in a way of looking at things. We're going to include in what we dismiss as the spiritual and separate it from the material that will include a spiritual inclination. And so he gets this from Owen Barfield. So in Barfield's, Lewis writes about this in his book, Miracles. And I'm going to quote here. Mr. Barfield has shown, as regards the history of language, that words did not start merely by referring to physical objects and then get extended by metaphor to refer to emotions, mental states, and the like. On the contrary, what we now call the literal and metaphorical meanings have both been disengaged by analysis from an ancient unity of meaning, which was neither or both. As long as we are trying to read back into that ancient unity, either the one or the other, we shall misread all early literature and ignore many states of consciousness which we ourselves still from time to time experience. Now, this is what our contemporary Dr. Jordan Peterson is doing when he's engaging with Scripture. He's seeing that there's something there, archetypes. He adopts a Jungian approach. He says there's something primally important here in this text that's saying something about human nature. What he doesn't acknowledge is the spiritual reality, however. He just doesn't. He doesn't see it. And how can you read the biblical text without acknowledging the very thing that it's very explicit about, that God exists, that God speaks, etc.? He takes that metaphorically to express some other thing. So he categorically precludes the very thing that is most obvious in the text, and which both Hebraic or Jewish thought and Christian thought will both affirm. That this is God's revelation, it's God speaking to us. He has spoken historically, he's left his word, it directs us into spiritual truths, because he discounts the spiritual, because he is, again, adopting the premises of atheistic humanism. And it's not without accident. It's not an accident that he's an evolutionist. Because, again, it's a chaotic and irrational view of life. He might have antidotes to chaos, but his worldview is chaos. And the antidotes aren't going to stop it if it's fundamentally chaotic. That's not, that the antidote's not enough. It's like a COVID vax, right? You can keep getting them, and you keep getting them and keep getting them, but it's still, you're still going to get it, and you're still going to transmit it, and you're going to have to keep getting the antidotes. Anyway, let me not get off on a topic that's just too funny. Yes?
That quote, where was it taken from?
That is taken from Miracles, pages 81 and 82. He mentions Barfield's ancient unities repeatedly in his works. He's very influenced by it. So is Tolkien, by the way. I'll say more about that when I get to Tolkien, because I think Tolkien, unlike Lewis, pushes this in the direction of Thomistic metaphysics, and Lewis does not. So there is a distinction between the two, in my opinion. But that's his reading of myth. Remember the conversion experience? Maybe you don't remember because you didn't know, but Lewis's account of his conversion is the common ground that both Lewis and Tolkien and Dyson, who's one of their companions, have on a walk. They love mythology. They love ancient Anglo-Saxon mythology, Greek mythology, all these mythologies. And what Tolkien explains to Lewis is that here we have a myth, but this is a true myth. It's not that realm of literature where it's talking about things that you find say something true about human nature, but aren't true. I think that's more close to what Peterson thinks, These are myths, and they say something true about human nature, but they're not actually what we will call reality. It's a useful fiction. It's an antidote to chaos, but that's it. Keep it at a distance. He says this about myth. Myth in general is a real, though unfocused, gleam of divine truth falling on human imagination. That's miracles again. It is in the incarnation that the truth becomes incarnate as history. And this is the best way, remember that work on miracles, dealing with all manner of miracles, but in particular those fundamental to the Christian faith, incarnation, resurrection, etc., is the most important, most potent application of that essay that I called transposition. Here's God just transposing his truth into the form of human flesh. It is a sort of the heaven and earth meet here. The myth and the fact, the reality between the two is met. And we have remember Christian theology, God is fully man, fully human. Council of Chalcedon, talking about human nature. He's both. So myth remains myth even when it becomes fact, and you have to respond it in two ways. You have to treat it as a myth. So this was the emphasis in my Bible as literature class. You have to read the ancient texts in some sense the way myths are meant to be read. You read it as literature. And but you also simultaneously have to read it as a factual account, and to lose either of them is missing the point of the text. It's speaking in both ways. And you don't want to break down those what we see as separate categories and separate the two. Otherwise, we get this purely mathematical universe, reductionist and inhumane. It's hot. This is coming off. Too much wool. So let me look at the text. I've done a lot of introductory thing. Let me talk more specifically about the text and instances of this. First instance is when he that is ransom has left Lewis's side, and he ends up on the other planet called Perelandra. So in chapter 2, Ransom is groping, lit, found a candle, and he's talking about Oyarsa, and then he's also talking about the dark power. So this is page 23 here. He says the other thing is this: the black archon, our own bent Oyarsa, is meditating some sort of attack on Perelandra. So this is the plot device. Satan, who's already taken our world and made it the silent planet so it doesn't hear Mal-Eldil's voice. It no longer hears the music of the spheres. There's an element in which Satan is the prince of this world. He's now planning an attack to extend it to other planets, to Perelandra even. And he is going to be brought into this cosmic battle. And the question in response, but is he at large like that in the solar system? Can he get there? That's just the point. He can't get there in his own person, in his own photosome, or whatever we should call it. As you know, he was driven back within these bounds centuries before any human life existed on our planet, under the earth. This is where he was driven. That's the medieval view, right? And he's driven down to the center of the earth. And if you've seen that old Ptolemaic picture of Dante, I'll put it up here for those of you who are Dante. I'm glad you are aware of that. Let's see if I can find it here. Oh, I got it. Come on a second. This will give me, I want a picture of map, diagram. I'll just put a whole map. Where does it go? There it is. Can you see that? Oh, not yet. It will come in a sec. So you remember the cosmology in which it's just circles, concentric circles, and the outermost is heaven and the innermost is the earth, right at the center of it. In Dante's conceptualization, the Empyrean is at the top and the spheres and so forth, just like we see here, and they go down: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury. He's 3 planets up. There's the earth. There is the moon, the first, Mercury the second, Venus the third planet, right? Well, here's what happens. Satan is driven from heaven. He falls. When he falls, he hits the earth. Where does he hit the earth? In Jerusalem. Bang! What happens when he falls? He hits the ground so hard, it displaces all the earth here up to the other side. Up on the other side comes Mount Purgatory, and at the same time it flips the axis. So that hell is on the it's on the other side of God. It's as far away, like the earth is also separated, right? So, and purgatory is towards God. That's how Dante conceptualizes it. And then there's a whole idea that, like, in the mount of the Temple Mount there's a big rock right in the middle of it. I don't know if you've ever been inside of it. That is a stopper on the mouth of hell. It's also the place in which Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac. It's Mount Moriah. That's the legend. Anyway. It starts to get really, this is, this is Dan Brown type stuff. This stuff. Question or a comment?
I guess to go back, but is that like kind of where the Balrog would come from in Tolkien's work?
From the digging too deep? Yes, more or less. Okay. Yep. It's correspondences, right? He is basing it on Christian teaching, but it's very loosely. It's not meant to be read as allegory, but it's certainly rooted in these sorts of things. I can talk about that more when we come to the Lord of the Rings. But as I say, Satan hits the ground here. It pushes all of this earth here up through this, Satan being right here at the epicenter of this all, and it pushes purgatory and the earthly paradise at the top of it, which, by the way, Lewis will depict here in Perelandra at the end. There's a Mount Purgatory and earthly paradise, and that's where Till and Tinidril will meet. The green man and the green lady, they'll be in the earthly paradise because, of course, they haven't been expelled from it. Anyway, that may be too much information, or maybe you, like me, find it fascinating and are happy to geek out on it a bit. Gosh, where did I find myself? Oh, he can't get there in his own person, in his own photosome or whatever. As you know, he was driven back within these bounds centuries ago before any human life existed on our planet. If he ventured to show himself outside the moon's orbit, he'd be driven back again by main force. In other words, there's an angelic guard around our world so that he can't leave this sphere. Why the moon? Because it's under the influence of the moon. The moon is waxable, mutable, changeable, subject to the fall. Like our world is. It's under the influence of the moon. That's why the tides wax and wane and the dogs bark and go crazy. And we talk about lunatics under the influence of the lunae, the moon. All these things are tied together to in medieval and Renaissance thought. But he's stuck there. That would be a different kind of war. That would be, again, a war like the original war in heaven. You or I could contribute no more to it than a flea could contribute to the defense of Moscow. He must be attempting Perelandra in some different way. And where do you come in? Well, simply, I've been ordered there. By Oyarsa, you mean? No, the order comes from much higher up. They all do, you know, in the long run. And what have you got to do when you get there? I haven't been told. You are just part of the Oyarsa's entourage? Oh no, he isn't going to be there. He is to transport me to Venus, to deliver me there. And after that, as far as I know, I shall be alone. But look here, Ransom, I mean, my voice trailed away. I know, said he with one of his singularly disarming smiles, you are feeling the absurdity of it. Dr. Elwyn Ransom, setting out single-handed to combat powers and principalities. You may even be wondering if I've got megalomania. I didn't mean that quite, said I. Oh, but I think you did. At any rate, that is what I have been feeling myself ever since that thing was sprung on me. So he starts doubting himself. He doubts his own sanity. That's part of the spiritual war. He's not even sure that he's sane. If you read the biography of saints, they will talk about these episodes themselves, where they're doubting, and it's not only other people are doubting, they're even doubting themselves, because there's a spiritual assault going on in the midst of what they knew at the beginning was just a path, something they ought to do, were commanded to do, knew they had to obey, and then the doubts began. But when you come to think of it, is it odder than what all of us have to do every day? When the Bible used that very expression about fighting with principalities and powers and depraved, hypersomatic beings at great heights, our translation is very misleading at this point, by the way, it meant that quite ordinary people were to do the fighting. Oh, I dare say, said I, but that's rather different. That refers to a moral conflict. Ransom threw back his head and laughed. Oh, Lewis, he said, you are inimitable, simply inimitable. Say what you like, Ransom, there is a difference. Yes, there is, but not a difference that makes it megalomania to think that any of us might have to fight either way. I'll tell you how I look at it. Haven't you noticed how in our own little war here on Earth, there are different phases, and while any one phase is going on, people get into the habit of thinking and behaving as if it was going to be permanent, like COVID. Right? It's going to be permanent. The current change, which was, it's the new normal. Okay, it's the new normal. And then we move to something else. But really the thing is changing under your hands all the time, and neither your assets nor your dangers this year are the same as the year before. Now, your idea that ordinary people will never have to meet the dark Eldela in any form, except a psychological or moral form, as temptations or the like, is simply an idea that held good for a certain phase of the cosmic war, the phase of the Great Siege, the phase which gave to our planet its name of Thulkandra, the silent planet. But supposing that phase is passing, in the next phase it may be anybody's job to meet them, well, in some quite different mode. Now here he's going into the fantasy science fiction. Just so you know, Lewis is not proposing that in the contemporary we're moving so that the spiritual war is going to be a physical battle, and that it's here. But it's possible. All wars are not the same. They have similarities, but they're not the same war. And here he's just saying in different contexts and different conditions, it's entirely possible that it be so. I see. I don't think he sees actually. Don't imagine I've been selected to go to Perelandra because I'm anyone in particular. One never can see, or not till long afterwards, why anyone was selected for any job. And when one does, it is usually some reason that leaves no room for vanity. Certainly, it is never for what the man himself would have regarded as his chief qualification. I rather fancy I'm being sent because those two blackguards who kidnapped me and took me to Malacandra did something which they never intended. Who? Weston and Devine. They initiated something. And I've been... Why is it me? Because they grabbed me. What happened? Namely, they gave a human being a chance to learn that language. What language do you mean? Hresahlab, of course, the language I learned in Malacandra. But surely you don't imagine they will speak the same language on Venus? Didn't I tell you about that? And then he goes into Old Solar, and I'll skip all over that. So he gets into the idea that in the realm of Perelandra, the spiritual war which we experience might be actually a physical battle, but he does not yet fully believe it even himself, as we shall see. How about reasoning and its relation to those two different faculties, at least seen by the pagan world and acknowledged throughout the medieval period and even into the Renaissance, maybe even into the Enlightenment, the reason, the will, and the passions? How do they relate on Perelandra? Because that's where I'm going to pick it up right now. And because he finds himself transported there, and he's naked, by the way. And he wakes up, and what's the description? It's quite interesting. At Ransom's waking, something happened to him which perhaps never happens to him until he is out of his own world. He saw reality and thought it was a dream. Does that resonate? Where does he get that phrase from? How does Adam describe his first vision of, oh, you don't know Paradise Lost as well. When Adam sees Eve for the first time in Paradise Lost, he thought he was dreaming. Book 4, Paradise Lost. He sees her. Remember, he names all the animals, and there's no partner that he finds that's suitable for him. He's a bit disappointed. God puts him to sleep, and then he wakes up, and he's running. He sees this being, which is Eve. He's running towards her, but he's not aware that he's even. He thinks he's dreaming, when actually he's awake, and the dream, which is the fulfillment of all of his desires, is a reality. That's what Lewis talks about. The language he's echoing here. And so he's quite self-consciously echoing. He has Paradise Lost strongly in his mind as he describes Perelandra. But anyway, he opened his eyes and saw a strange, heraldically colored tree loaded with yellow fruits and silver leaves. Round the base of the indigo stem was coiled a small dragon covered with scales of red gold. He recognized the garden of the Hesperides at once. He remembered how, in the very different world called Malacandra, he had met the original of the Cyclops, a giant in a cave and a shepherd. Were all the things which appeared as mythology on earth scattered through other worlds as realities? By the way, he's going to meet mermaids and mermen here as well, just like he does in Prince Caspian. Right under the water, these beings, same sort of thing. Man-like things existing before men in our own world. He eats, and when he eats, he gets a sort of new consciousness out of it as well. So this is an interesting thing. When we eat, we taste the food, where our bodies are refortified. Like, we have to eat to live. Our bodies do not provide their own nutrition. We require food to keep up our health, to keep up our physical being. Here there's a suggestion that the food has a spiritual tonic to it as well. There's something even more potent to it. And again, this whole world does things to him, the same thing that he described when he was in the atmosphere in Out of the Silent Planet, that the light did. It gives him a vitality, a spiritual vitality that he lacked when he was living on the Silent Planet, and which he experienced when he stuck one leg over the wall and one was light and the other was dark. There was a vitality to the light. And when he picks up the fruit, what does he say? Page 42. Great globes of yellow fruit hung from the trees, clustered as toy balloons are clustered on the back of the balloon man, and about the same size. He picked one of them and turned it over and over. The rind was smooth and firm and seemed impossible to tear open. Then, by accident, one of his fingers punctured it and went through into coldness. After a moment's hesitation, he put the little aperture to his lips. He had meant to extract the smallest experimental sip, but the first taste put his caution all to flight. It was, of course, a taste, just as his thirst and hunger had been thirst and hunger. But then it was so different from every other taste that it seemed mere pedantry to call it a taste at all. It was like the discovery of a totally new genus of pleasures, a whole new category, a totally different variety of pleasures, something unheard of among men, out of all reckoning, beyond all covenant. For one draught of this on earth, wars would be fought and nations betrayed. It could not be classified. He could never tell us when he came back to the world of men whether it was sharp or sweet, savory or voluptuous, creamy or piercing. Not like that was all he could ever say to such inquiries. As he let the empty gourd fall from his hand and was about to pluck a second one, it came into his head that he was now neither hungry nor thirsty. And yet to repeat a pleasure so intense and almost so spiritual seemed an obvious thing to do. His reason, or what we commonly take to be reason in our own world, was all in favor of tasting this miracle again. The childlike innocence of fruit, the labors he'd undergone, the uncertainty of the future, all seemed to commend the action. Yet something seemed opposed to this quote-unquote reason. It is difficult to suppose that this opposition came from desire, for what desire would turn from so much deliciousness? But for whatever reason, it appeared to him better not to taste again. Perhaps the experience had been so complete that repetition would be a vulgarity, like asking to hear the same symphony twice in a day. Anyways, he's searching for language. This is what he's describing throughout. So this world, an unfallen world, he's first of all not even describing the spiritual powers. What would an unfallen world be like? What would taste be like? We assume that the taste, yes, we have a sin nature. But what would have been different about even the realm of experience in an unfallen world? And would it not, and he talked about even, it's almost a spiritual experience. Would not all things have directed him in that sense? Without ambiguity, pointed him towards the fact that all things were created by God and lead to that sort of spiritual satisfaction. And so then to eat another of them would be to suggest that the spiritual entity which he experienced did not satisfy him whereas it had done. And so he didn't take it. Whereas we, if it was a candy, would have just like, oh, candy, candy all gone. And then afterwards, actually after the second one, it didn't taste so good anymore, but I threw them down my throat so quickly that now I wish I hadn't. I have a bellyache and I'm crying. You can tell I have children. But he sees the dragon looks at it, and lots of talk about his reasoning. His reasoning talks to him, and he often overrules his own reasoning because he recognizes there's more than, it's just not right. And that begins, that awareness that his reason can lead him astray is important when he meets the figure of Weston very soon, who is basically the incarnation of rationalistic science. And the whole world here is almost giving itself to him as an apologetic against the sort of arguments that Weston might propose. He arrives soon after. Sees a spacecraft up above. He sees a darkish shape, which he waves at, page 52. But because the waves are going up and down, the islands are going up and down. And he sees a female, and he's surprised at this. Why is he surprised at it? No idea. Because he even says this himself. It is difficult to say why this surprised him. So, granted the human form, he was presumably as likely to meet a female as a male. But it did surprise him, so that only when the two islands once more began to fall apart into separate wave valleys did he realize that he had said nothing to her, but stood staring like a fool. Well, she's not wearing clothes either. So he's just like, now, right? And he's sort of, because he's surprised, and there is also a very beautiful green female something. And she has company. beasts, birds, all sorts of animals are around her, dancing around her. And the next time he sees her is on page 55. He's thinking about speaking to her using the old solar tongue. He's going to say, I'm from another world. And then in mid-sentence, he stops because she does something he wasn't expecting. She points at him to the other animals, and the animals all laugh. And she laughs, which I can imagine would not go over particularly well. She raised her arm and pointed at him, not as in menace, but as though inviting the other creatures to behold him. At the same moment, her face changed again, and for a second he thought she was going to cry. Instead, she burst into laughter, peal upon peal of laughter, till her whole body shook with it, till she bent almost double, with her hands resting on her knees like our own dogs in similar circumstances, dimly understood that there was merriment afoot. All manner of gambling, wing clapping, snorting, and standing upon hind legs began to be displayed. And still the green lady laughed, till yet again the wave divided them, and she was out of sight. Ransom was thunderstruck. Had the Eldil sent him to meet an idiot? Or an evil spirit that mocked men? Or was it, after all, a hallucination? For this was just how a hallucination might be expected to behave. Then an idea occurred to him which would have taken much longer, perhaps, to occur to me or you. It might not be she who was mad, but he who was ridiculous. He glanced down at himself. Certainly his legs presented an odd spectacle, for one was brownish red, like the flanks of a Titian satyr, and the other was white, by comparison almost a leprous white, because he's fallen asleep in the sun, and he's got sunburnt on one side, so he's white on one side and red on the other, and she ends up calling him piebald, because there's a sort of spectacled bird. That's her name for him, piebald, because he's red and white. Can you imagine that's your name now? And she means no offense, that's even worse. That's how he looks. Had this been the joke, he felt a momentary impatience with the creature who could mar the meeting of two worlds with laughter at such a triviality. Then he smiled in spite of himself at the very undistinguished career he was having on Perelandra. For dangers, he had been prepared, but to be first a disappointment and then an absurdity. Hello. Here were the lady and her island in sight again, and she comes to him and has an experience that he had not really thought possible. On the ancient planet Malacandra, he had met creatures who were not even remotely human in form, but who had turned out on further acquaintance to be rational and friendly. Under an alien exterior, he had discovered a heart like his own. Was he now to have the reverse experience? For now he realized that the word human refers to something more than the bodily form, or even to the rational mind. Now here he's digging into the whole Enlightenment definition of man as a rational animal. Right? It refers also to that community of blood and experience which unites all men and women on the earth. Humanity, the humanitas. He gets it from the Roman conception. They get it from the Greeks. The Greeks call it paideia, education. It's something, a common inheritance. The Romans call it humanitas. It's something that unites the entire human race. But this creature was not of his own race. No windings, however intricate, of any genealogical tree could ever establish a connection between himself and her. In that sense, not one drop in her veins was human. The universe had produced her species and his quite independently. All this passed through his mind very quickly and was speedily interrupted by his consciousness that the light was changing. And he speaks to her, I am a stranger, I come in peace, is it your will that I swim over to your land? She looks at him with an expression of curiosity. What is peace? She asked. Ransom could have danced with impatience. At any rate, he jumps in the water and swims across. Anyway, wakes up on the other side, or he tried to. He ends up on an island. The island is nonetheless his own. In the dark, he didn't get to her island, but his island, when he wakes up, is 5 feet away from hers. And then he goes across. And then she speaks to him. This is chapter 5. And now this is interesting. What's the first thing she says? I was young yesterday, she began, but he did not hear the rest of her speech because they're separated by the meeting. Now it had actually come about proved overwhelming. You must not misunderstand the story at this point. What overwhelmed him was not in the least the fact that she, like himself, was totally naked. Embarrassment and desire were both 1,000 miles away from his experience. And if he was a little ashamed of his own body, that was a shame which had nothing to do with difference of sex, and turned only in the fact that he knew his body to be a little ugly and a little ridiculous. Still less was her color a source of horror to him. In her own world, that green was beautiful and fitting. It was his own pasty, white, and angry sunburn which were the monstrosity. It was neither of these, but he found himself unnerved. He had to ask her presently to repeat what she'd been saying. I was young yesterday, she said, when I laughed at you. Now I know that the people in your world do not like to be laughed at. You say you were young? Yes. Are you not young today also? Just a day later, right? She appeared to be thinking for a few moments, so intently that the flowers dropped, unguarded from her hand. Another nod of the cap to Milton. Do you remember the instance in Paradise Lost where Eve is lost and Adam greets her and he has flowers in his hands ready to receive her, and he drops the flowers when he sees that she's fallen and she's dead to him, and the flowers there, Milton's terrific descriptions, they fade instantly and they fall to the ground. It's like a pathetic fallacy. It's the description, what happened to the flowers, what happened to her, etc. But she is now, there's no sin that's been happened, but experience that is not part of her world has happened to her. And it's something like a fall. It's experience. It's a change. It's the change that you're not allowed to enact in Star Trek. You're not allowed to interfere or change life. It has to remain exactly as it is. You know, all these, they do the same thing in those Marvel movies as well. You can go back in time, but you mustn't change anything because that'll change the future and all that sort of craziness. Anyway, but she drops them. I see it now, she said presently. It is very strange to say one is young at the moment one is speaking. But tomorrow I shall be older, and then I shall say I was young today. You are quite right. This is great wisdom you are bringing, O piebald man. She'd never seen the dimension of time at all. She's not going to die. She was inexperienced, is what she means by young. She didn't have this experience. But the actual chronology, the idea of time and thinking of oneself or one's past self and present self had never occurred to her. It's an abstraction. It's the way we look at ourselves. We look back in the past. By the way, the word back is a metaphor. You can't look back at yourself. You can't see yourself, for one, and it's not looking backwards anyway. It's thinking of yourself the way you were in abstraction. That's what beings who have space and time as their limitations think upon. And we've just extrapolated it into human history as a way of looking at life. But here, Lewis quite brilliantly realizes those are just mortal conditions. They would not necessarily be the ones that would operate in her world. Even though she's finite, she's not infinite, but still, she doesn't think of time the same way. She just thinks of experience. And so, yesterday I was young. What do you mean, she says, this looking backward and forward along the line and seeing how a day has one appearance as it comes to you, and another when you are in it, and a third when it has gone past, like the waves. But you are very little older than yesterday. How do you know that? I mean, said Ransom, a night is not a very long time. She thought again, and then spoke suddenly, her face lightening. I see it now, she said. You think times have lengths. Just think about that. Why do we think that time has a length? Because we measured it. And therefore, because we measure it, we think it has a length. It doesn't have a length. Time is time. It has no length. You can give it a length to try and master it, to sense a sense of limitation on it, and one that will allow you to understand it. But it actually has no length. But it does to him. He just defaults to thinking that way. She doesn't. A night is always a night, whatever you do in it, as from this tree to that is always so many paces, whether you take them quickly or slowly. I suppose that is true in a way, but the waves do not always come at equal distances. I see that you come from a wise world, if this is wise. I've never done it before. Stepping out of life into the alongside and looking at oneself, living as if one were not alive. Do they all do that in your world, piebald? Just think about that. To reflect on a self that's not in the present self, that person no longer being alive because it's just in a memory, and thinking of it in those terms. You're thinking, it's an abstract way of thinking. Children have very great difficulty with it. Old people do as well, actually, interestingly. And you can sell things with it, and you can show up on time. You know, timepieces, you can have class times. You can be late for things. You can show up early. You can measure this is supposed to go on for this length of time. What's the point of the time? The measurement of it. Anyway, what do you know about other worlds? Said Ransom. I know this. Beyond the roof, it is all deep heaven, the high place. And the low is not really spread out as it seems to be. Here she indicated the whole landscape. But is rolled up into little balls, little lumps of the low swimming in the high. And the oldest and greatest of them all have on them that which we've never seen, nor heard, and cannot at all understand. But on the younger, Mal-Eldil has made to grow the things like us, that breathe and breed. How have you found all this out? Your roof is so dense that your people cannot see through into deep heaven and look at the other worlds. By the way, Venus had a cloud cover around it so you can't even see the sky. She can't even see it. How do you know this then? Up till now her face had been grave. At this point she clapped her hands, and a smile such as Ransom had never seen changed her. One does not see that smile here except in children, and there's nothing of the child about it here. Oh, I see it, she said. I am older now. Your world has no roof. You look right out into the high place and see the great dance with your own eyes. You live always in that terror and that delight, and what we must only believe, you can behold. Is not this a wonderful invention of Mal-Eldil's? When I was young, I could imagine no beauty but this of our own world. But he can think of all, and all different. Isn't that terrific? But what is she marveling at? Not that he has a different perspective than she does, but that God can conceive of all these different realities and can create them different, and they will all nonetheless be good. And there isn't one of them which is superior per se, and other inferior, one dying out. No, these are created good and yet different, conditions even. That is one of the things bewildering me, said Ransom, that you are not different. You are shaped like the women of my own kind. I had not expected that. I've been in one other world beside my own, but the creatures there are not at all like you and me. What is bewildering about it? I do not see why different worlds should bring forth like creatures. Do different trees bring forth like fruit? But that other world was older than yours, she said. How do you know that? That's true, by the way, and Ransom knows it, but how do you know that? Mal-Eldil is telling me, answered the woman. That's not fair. So there's but the idea that God is speaking to her immediately, such that he doesn't hear it, but she does, involves spiritual powers in the equation once again in ways that's interesting. When God walked with Adam and Eve in the garden and spoke with them, how would that communication have taken place? Who knows? We just know that it happens. But Mal-Eldil is telling me. And as she spoke, the landscape had become different, though with a difference none of the senses could identify. The light was dim, the air gentle, and all Ransom body was bathed in bliss. But the garden where he stood seemed to be packed, quite full, and as if an unendurable pressure had been laid upon his shoulders. His legs failed him, and he half sank, half fell into a sitting position. So the presence of God, which he did not experience when she mentions, is suddenly tangible to him, even though he can't see it and can't feel it. The weight, literally the weight of glory. It all comes into my mind now. I see the big furry creatures and the white giants. What is it you called them? The Sorns and the blue rivers. Oh, what a strong pleasure it would be to see them with my outward eyes, to touch them in the stronger, because there are no more of that kind to come. It is only in the ancient worlds they linger yet. Why? Said Ransom in a whisper, looking up at her. You must know that better than I, she said. For was it not in your own world that all this happened? All what? I thought it would be you who would tell me of it, said the woman, now in her turn bewildered. What are you talking about? I mean, said she, that in your world Mal-Eldil first took himself. This form, the form of your race and mine. You know that, said Ransom sharply. Those who have had a dream which is very beautiful, but from which nevertheless they ardently desire to awake, will understand his sensations. Yes, I know that Mal-Eldil has made me older to that amount since we began speaking. The expression on her face was such that he'd never seen and could not steadily look at. The whole of this adventure seemed to be slipping out of his hands. There was a long silence, because instead of meeting a woman who he was going to rescue, the damsel in distress, he's now realized that she is his superior. He feels like a complete idiot. He's a fat, middle-aged, red and white man who is speaking to a woman who has immediate access to Mal-Eldil's thoughts, and it's just like, I can't tell her anything that she doesn't better understand than I do. And and nonetheless, I'm here. So what the heck? So he's disappointed. Oh, my lady, why do you say that such creatures linger only in the ancient worlds? Are you so young? She answered. How could they come again? Now, this is the interesting part. Since our beloved became a man, how could reason in any world take on another form? How could it take on any other form? Do you not understand? That is all over. Now, again, think about that the way that addresses the science fiction. Superior beings to us, that's not how it will be. There will be no superior being. So my daughter talked to me about UFOs and type stuff because it's just interesting conversation. I don't discount the possibility. I would say that this is an interesting comment to make on it. If God himself became man, how would it be that these beings that we might meet might be superior to us, more evolved or whatever, if you wanted to posit evolution? Do you not understand? That is all over. Among times there is a time that turns a corner and everything. This side of it is new. Times do not go backward. And can one little world like mine be the corner? I do not understand. Corner with us is not the name of a size. And do you, said Ransom with some hesitations, and do you know why he came thus to my world? All through this part of the conversation, he found it difficult to look higher than her feet, so that her answer was merely a voice in the air above him. Yes, said the voice, I know the reason, but it is not the reason you know. There was more than one reason, and there is one I know and cannot tell to you, and another that you know and cannot tell to me. And after this, said Ransom, it will all be men? You say that as if you were sorry. I think, said Ransom, I have no more understanding than a beast. I do not well know what I am saying, but I love the furry people whom I met in Malakander, that old world. Are they to be swept away? Are they only to be rubbish in the deep heaven? I do not know what rubbish means, she answered, nor what you are saying. You do not mean they are worse because they came early in the history and do not come again. They are their own part of the history and not another. We are on this side of the wave and they on the far side. All is new. Now, it's not almost the last words of Scripture. Behold, I'm making all things new. Right? Again, Lewis using this to engage in the discussion of Paradise Lost. He talks a bit about the categories of rational, describing her, etc. But I think I am last passage I'm going to look at here. She wants to be introduced. She's mentioned already the king. And who is this king, Ransom wants to know. He is himself. He is the king, said she. How can one answer such a question? Look here, said Ransom. You must have had a mother. Is she alive? Where is she? When did you see her last? I have a mother, said the green lady, looking full at him with eyes of untroubled wonder. What do you mean? I am the mother. And once again there fell upon Ransom the feeling that it was not she, or not she only, who had spoken. No other sound came to his ears, for the sea and the air were still. But a phantom sense of vast choral music was all about him. The awe which her apparently witless replies had been dissipating for the past few minutes returned upon him. I do not understand, he said. Nor I, answered the lady. Only my spirit praises Maleldo, who comes down from deep heaven into this lowness and will make me to be blessed by all the times. This sounds like the Magnificat, actually. Make me blessed by all times that are rolling towards us. It is he who is strong and makes me strong, and fills empty worlds with good creatures. If you are a mother, where are your children? Not yet, she answered. Who will be their father? The king. Who else? But the king, had he no father? He is the father. You mean, said Ransom slowly, that you and he are the only two of your kind in this whole world? Of course. Then presently her face changed. Oh, how young I have been. I see it now. I had known that there were many creatures in that ancient world of the Throssa and the Sorns, but I had forgotten that yours also was an older world than ours. I see. There are many of you by now. I'd been thinking that you also were only two. I thought you were the king and father of your own world, but there are children of children of children by now, and you perhaps are one of these. Yes, said Ransom. Greet your lady and mother well from me when you return to your own world, said the green woman. And now for the first time there was a note of deliberate courtesy, even of ceremony in her speech. Ransom understood. She knew now at last she was not addressing an equal. She was a queen sending a message to a queen through a commoner, and her manner to him was henceforward more gracious. Not condescending, more gracious. He found it difficult to make his best answer. Our mother and lady is dead, he said. What is dead? With us they go away after a time. Maleldo takes the soul out of them and puts it somewhere else in deep heaven, we hope. We call it death. Do not wonder, O piebald man, that your world should have been chosen for time's corner. You live looking out, always on heaven itself, and as if this were not enough, Maleldo takes you all thither in the end. You are favored beyond all worlds. I wonder. No, it's not like that. I wonder, said the woman, if you were sent here to teach us death. I'll leave it off with that. Ominous tone. I wonder if you're not here to teach us death. That is exactly what Weston will be there to teach her. And the question is, will he succeed?